Inside my grandmother's heirloom box lay a secret that could bankrupt my future. But the man I trusted to protect me was the one dismantling my past, piece by piece. He lied about his mother, his job, and our entire life. Now I know he lied about something far more deadly. The smell of lemon polish and old velvet always clung to the mahogany box. It was more than just storage. It was a time capsule, a silent chronicle of my grandmother's life, and by extension, mine. Inside, nestled on faded silk, lay the jewels. The pieces weren't just expensive, they were important. There was the Art Deco sapphire ring, her engagement gift, and the delicate Edwardian pearl earrings that she wore on her wedding day. I inherited the entire collection when she passed 5 years ago, and it became my most cherished secret, stored away in the back of my walk-in closet, guarded by layers of forgotten coats. I had never even considered selling any of it. They were heirlooms, irreplaceable, tangible links to a woman whose grace I desperately tried to emulate. Plus, honestly, they were beautiful enough to make a museum curator weep. But then came David. David wasn't just my boyfriend. He was the man I thought I'd build a life with. We met during a stressful time in my career. I was juggling freelance graphic design projects, running on caffeine and sheer panic. He was stability personified, a meticulous accountant with sensible shoes, a steady job at a mid-sized firm downtown, and a comforting predictability that felt like an anchor. For 2 years, our life was a comfortable montage of quiet dinners, shared Netflix queues, and long-term planning whispered late at night. We even started looking at condos. David's mother, Eleanor, was a fixture in our budding life. She was sweet, if a little frail, and prone to dramatic pronouncements about her ailing health and the sheer cost of living in the city. She lived in a small, slightly dilapidated bungalow an hour upstate, and David constantly worried about her. He'd spend weekends driving up to fix a leaky faucet or repaint a peeling window frame, always returning exhausted but satisfied. About 6 months ago, things got tense for Eleanor. David started getting frantic phone calls during dinner. He'd excuse himself, pacing the kitchen, his brow deeply furrowed. When he came back, the air around him felt thick with worry. "It's Mom," he'd sigh, running a hand through his already messy hair. "The property taxes are up again, and she needs that specialized physical therapy after her fall last winter. The insurance, it just doesn't cover enough." My heart ached for him. David was fiercely loyal, and watching him struggle with the guilt of not being able to provide adequately for his aging parent was difficult. We started dipping into our savings account, the future house fund, to help bridge the gap. I didn't mind. That's what you do for family, even if Eleanor wasn't technically mine yet. "We'll figure it out, babe," I remember saying, squeezing his hand tight across the dinner table. "We're a team." He'd smiled then, a genuine relieved smile that melted away my anxiety. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah." The financial strain didn't stop, though. If anything, it intensified. David started taking extra late shifts at the firm, coming home smelling faintly of stale office coffee and looking hollow-eyed. He'd refuse my offers to help with the books, saying he had it under control. He kept his phone calls with his mother brief and hushed. Then, 3 weeks ago, I noticed the first real change in the mahogany box. I was packing for a weekend trip and decided to retrieve the emerald pendant, a gorgeous Victorian piece I'd always promised myself I'd wear for a special occasion. I slid open the box, the familiar scent wafting out. I counted the pieces, a nervous habit I'd developed since Eleanor's troubles started. 2 rings, 3 necklaces, 4 brooches, and the pearl earrings. Everything seemed accounted for. I closed it, put it back, and forgot about it until last Tuesday. That's when the real dread started creeping in, slow and cold, like water seeping under a door. I was organizing my jewelry drawer, realizing I needed a better display case for my own, less significant pieces, and I instinctively went back to the mahogany box for comparison. I needed to see the craftsmanship one more time. I lifted the lid. The velvet lining seemed flatter. My breath hitched. I counted again, my fingers trembling as they brushed the cool metal. The Art Deco sapphire ring was gone. It wasn't just misplaced. I knew its exact resting spot, the slight indentation in the silk where the heavy setting always settled. I tore the box apart, shaking the lining, looking under the false bottom that hadn't been there since Grandma showed it to me as a child. The ring, the centerpiece of the collection, was nowhere to be found. I felt a dizzying rush of panic. I confronted David that evening, trying to keep my voice level, framing it as a terrible moment of forgetfulness on my part. "David, have you seen the mahogany box recently? I can't find the sapphire ring." He was chopping vegetables for stir-fry, the rhythmic thud of the knife the only sound for a moment. He didn't look up immediately. "The old box? No. Why?" His tone was perfectly neutral, almost bored. "Well, it's gone. I'm sure it was there last month, but now it's just vanished. It's too valuable to just disappear." He finally stopped chopping, wiped his hands slowly on a dish towel, and turned, his expression serious. "Sarah, honey, you're stressed. You probably moved it when you were cleaning out the closet for the winter coats. Maybe you put it in the safe deposit box?" I shook my head, conviction hardening in my chest. "No, I haven't touched the box since before Christmas. You know how protective I am of those things." He walked over, embraced me tightly, and kissed the top of my head. "Look, I get it. It's sentimental, but it's a small ring. Maybe it slipped into a lining. Don't panic. If it's missing, we'll look for it together this weekend, okay? For now, let's eat." His calm was usually reassuring, but this time it felt like a practiced defense. I agreed, unable to push further without looking hysterical. For the next 2 days, I played along, pretending I was merely misplaced the ring, all while my mind screamed that someone had taken it. I decided to conduct my own secret investigation. I started small, checking my insurance paperwork, then calling the antique dealer Grandma used to frequent, just to see if any piece matched the description without naming the specific item. Nothing. Then, late Thursday night, while David was supposedly still working late, a common occurrence lately, I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. I pulled out my laptop, intending to write a detailed inventory list for the police, just in case. As I pulled up my old family photos to confirm the exact setting of the sapphire, I stumbled upon a folder I didn't recognize. E_docs. Curiosity overcoming caution, I clicked. It contained scans of several official-looking documents. They weren't about Eleanor's taxes. They were high-resolution photographs of pawn receipts and bills of sale, all dated within the last 6 months. And every single receipt bore a name I recognized instantly. D. Miller, David's full name. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked on the first file titled Sapphire Sale Confirmation. It wasn't just a pawn ticket, it was a final sale record dated 5 weeks ago, complete with a detailed appraisal description. The buyer? A high-end jewelry resale consortium based in another state. I scrolled down, frantically reading the itemized list of items sold over the past few months. There it was. The Edwardian pearl earrings, the antique diamond brooch shaped like a dragonfly, and then the final entry, dated just 10 days ago. One Art Deco sapphire solitaire ring, circa 1925, GIA certified. The selling price listed was substantial, enough to cover Eleanor's property taxes for the next 3 years. My vision blurred. He hadn't just borrowed money. He had systematically dismantled my grandmother's legacy piece by agonizing piece and hidden the evidence in a password-protected folder on our shared drive. He lied about the stress. He lied about the slow drain of savings. He lied to my face just days ago when I asked about the ring. I scrambled back to the closet, yanked open the mahogany box, and ripped out the silk lining where the pearl earrings used to rest. I looked again at the empty space. They were gone. All of it. Just as I registered the cold, sickening finality of realizing my most precious inheritance was gone forever, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from David. "Running late. Traffic is awful. Be home around 1 a.m. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, the blood roaring in my ears. He claimed he was stuck in traffic near his office downtown, but I knew his routine. I knew the one place he always avoided after 9 p.m. because of an alleged terrible construction zone that never seemed to materialize. I knew exactly where he was heading when he lied about late nights. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, driving like a maniac toward the one place David swore he never went, the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood where his mother, Eleanor, lived. I had to know if the money from my grandmother's memory was truly buying Eleanor comfort or something far more chilling. The drive upstate was a blur of flashing brake lights and the sickly yellow glow of sodium street lamps. Every mile hammered home the betrayal. David hadn't just made a unilateral decision about our future. He had stolen from my past to secure his present, all under the guise of filial piety. The thought of him holding my grandmother's sapphire, knowing he was calculating its black market value while I admired the supposed authenticity of the setting, made my stomach clench with nausea. I pulled onto Eleanor's quiet, dimly lit street. Her bungalow sat set back from the road, framed by overgrown lilac bushes. The house always looked sad, but tonight there was an unsettling stillness about it. No lights were on in the front windows, which was unusual. Eleanor was a notorious light keeper, afraid of the dark and the shadows it cast on her aging porch. My heart began to thud a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I killed the engine about 50 yards down the street and let the car coast to a stop under a massive oak tree, plunging myself into darkness. I didn't want my headlights illuminating the scene if David was already here, potentially finalizing some grotesque transaction. I crept out of the car, the gravel crunching loudly under my sneakers, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. I circled around the side of the house, keeping close to the hedge line, heading for the small utility window in the laundry room, the one David always complained about needing new putty for. As I reached the side of the house, I paused. There was a sliver of light coming from the back patio door, a faint, warm glow that contradicted the darkness everywhere else. And then I heard something. Not a crash or an argument, but a low, steady murmur, like someone reciting scripture or reading aloud in a hushed, urgent tone. I pressed my ear against the cold glass of the patio door, straining to decipher the sound. It wasn't David. The voice was higher-pitched, slightly breathy, and undeniably Eleanor's. And the contract must be finalized before dawn, darling. The others are circling. They want the land, but they won't wait for the legal battle to finish. You said the last piece was secured? My blood turned to ice water. The last piece? Did she know about the jewelry? Was David meeting his mother to discuss a final sale, perhaps for the house itself? Then David's voice cut in, deeper, laced with that familiar, tired exasperation. Yes, Mom, I told you, the sapphire is gone. It covered the tax shortfall, and I got us another 6 months on the mortgage. It should buy us time until I can liquidate the final assets. Liquidate the final assets? What assets? I didn't own anything else of significant value that David knew about, unless he was referring to my remaining jewelry that I hadn't even realized was missing yet. The thought made me physically recoil. Good, David, excellent, Eleanor purred, and the tone sent shivers down my spine. It was possessive, almost predatory, entirely different from the fragile persona she usually projected. Now, about your little arrangement with Sarah. We need to expedite things. The longer she stays, the more questions she asks, and we cannot have her snooping around the real estate deeds. Deeds? What real estate deeds? I know, Mom. I'm working on it, David said, sounding strained. She loves me. She thinks I'm struggling to keep you afloat. I just need a few more weeks to make sure the transfer is clean, and then I can finally tell her the truth about the property. The truth, David? Be careful with the truth, Eleanor cautioned sharply. Remember why you're doing this. Remember what your father left behind. This house, this land, is the only thing that matters, and Sarah's trust fund will take care of the rest, won't it? Once you're officially divorced and she's signed over the temporary guardianship papers? Divorced? Guardianship? My mind struggled to process the sequence of words. Divorce, guardianship, trust fund. I hadn't even heard the word divorce mentioned in 2 years, and my trust fund, established by my own father, was untouchable until I turned 40, unless a legal guardian or spouse initiated a complex court proceeding. I took a shaky step backward, the gravel crunching again, louder this time under the pressure of my sudden realization. The murmuring inside stopped dead. The patio light snapped off, plunging the back of the house into absolute blackness. Did you hear that, David? Eleanor's voice was sharp, no longer soft or frail, but laced with a sudden, terrifying alertness. Hear what? David's voice was closer now, laced with suspicion. I froze, every muscle locked tight, desperately hoping the shadows of the oak tree would swallow me whole. I pressed myself flat against the rough brick wall, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Silence stretched, thick and brittle. Then, David's footsteps sounded, heavy, rapid, moving toward the patio door. "Probably just a raccoon, Mom. I'll check it out. Stay inside." The patio door slid open with a soft metallic shk. I could hear David breathing, his gaze sweeping the dark yard toward the front of the house, toward where my car was parked. He was looking away from me. Now was my only chance. I had to see what they were doing, what deeds they were talking about, and what connection my trust fund had to Eleanor's shabby bungalow. I darted low and fast, keeping to the shadows of the neighboring fence line, praying the overgrown hedges would provide enough cover to reach the front yard unnoticed. I rounded the corner of the house and risked a quick glance back toward the patio. David was standing outside, silhouetted against the faint interior light, scanning the darkness. As I started creeping toward my car, something caught my eye right near the front porch, something David must have dropped in his hurry to check the backyard. It was a small, folded piece of paper, damp with dew. Against my better judgment, and driven by a morbid need to confirm the depths of his deception, I snatched it up. It wasn't a deed. It was a legal document, folded multiple times, with a clearly marked header, Petition for Temporary Custody and Guardianship. And beneath the line marked Petitioner, in David's unmistakable accountant's script, was his signature. Beneath the line marked Ward, written in a shaky hand I didn't immediately recognize, were the words, Eleanor M. Davison. My heart stopped, then lurched violently. Eleanor wasn't David's mother. She was his aunt. And then I saw the bottom section of the document, the section detailing the assets to be managed during the temporary guardianship, a section that explicitly listed Sarah K. Hayes' inherited assets per prenuptial agreement draft dated 2 years prior. Before I could even process what that meant, a prenuptial agreement I never signed, drafted 2 years ago when we had only been dating 6 months, a voice cut through the night, sharp and furious, right behind me. "What are you doing lurking around my mother's house, Sarah?" The voice was deep, unfamiliar, and laced with an aggression that felt wholly misplaced in the sleepy suburban night. It wasn't David. It wasn't Eleanor. It was a man's voice, and it was inches from my ear. I whirled around, dropping the folded petition in my shock. Standing there, illuminated eerily by the single porch light that had suddenly flickered on near Eleanor's front door, was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket. He was not a neighbor. There was an undeniable tension in his posture, the look of someone who had been waiting, or perhaps hunting. His eyes, shadowed under the brim of a baseball cap, narrowed as they flickered from me to the ground where the document lay. "Don't move," the man commanded, his hands subtly shifting beneath his jacket. Panic, pure and primal, flooded my system, overriding the shock of the custody papers. I didn't hesitate. I bolted. I scrambled back toward the side yard, the rough grass tearing at my thin sneakers. I heard the man curse and start after me, his heavy steps pounding the pavement behind me, a terrifying echo of David's earlier sprint toward the patio. "Stop! You don't know what you're touching," he roared. I dove back toward the hedge line, desperate to put the bulky bulk of the house between us. My mind was racing through the new, insane information. Eleanor wasn't his mother. She was his aunt. A custody petition existed, signed by David, for Eleanor. And all of this was apparently tied to a prenuptial agreement I never consented to, designed to give David access to my trust fund the moment we were married. As I reached the corner of the house, I slammed directly into David, who had clearly just finished checking the back patio and was now rushing around to the front, alerted by the shouts. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" David exclaimed, grabbing my arm with surprising force. He looked frantic, not protective. His eyes darted nervously toward the front porch where the stranger stood, now fully revealed in the porch light. The stranger stopped dead when he saw David. A beat of profound silence passed between the three of us, thick with unspoken history and immediate threat. "David," the stranger said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You fool. I told you to handle this quietly. Who is this woman?" David pulled me tighter against his side, attempting a facade of calm control that was rapidly disintegrating. "She's Sarah, my fiancée. She was just leaving, John. There was a noise. I thought maybe—" "She's not your fiancée, you idiot. She's the beneficiary of the assets you're trying to bankrupt the estate with." John, the stranger, took a step forward, his gaze fixed accusingly on David. "She's not supposed to be here." Did you really think you could sell off Aunt Eleanor's collateral and then just keep your primary investor hanging around? Collateral. My jewelry was Eleanor's collateral. The debt wasn't for Eleanor's medical bills. The debt was David's, and my grandmother's heirlooms were the down payment to keep Aunt Eleanor's crumbling estate afloat long enough for him to secure my trust fund through a sham marriage and a predatory prenuptial agreement. It was under control, John. The jewelry covered the immediate liquidity crisis, David stammered, finally abandoning the pretense of concern for me. He shoved me away slightly, positioning himself between me and John. I was handling the transfer papers for the final release of the funds once the divorce petition was filed. Divorce petition, custody petition, prenup. It was a coordinated, multi-layered scheme. I felt detached, watching the scene unfold as if it were a poorly written movie. I finally found my voice, thin and trembling, but cutting through the tension. Divorce? David, we aren't married. And who is Eleanor, really? David flinched as if struck. John laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Oh, she knows, David. Look at her face. She figured it out the moment she saw the documents. John gestured sharply toward the crumpled paper at my feet. You know, I almost admire the audacity, using a dead woman's heirloom jewelry to fund the upkeep on your real asset, the aging relative whose impending incapacitation clears the path to the big payout. My eyes darted down to the petition again. Eleanor M. Davison. The handwriting beneath the ward line was indeed shaky, but the signature above it, the one David had supposedly secured for a custody battle, was firm. It was too firm for someone supposedly suffering from severe physical ailments. I need that paper, Sarah. Now, John growled, taking another purposeful step toward me. I bent down, not to pick it up, but to kick it hard, sliding the document under the passenger side door of my car. If I couldn't keep it, no one was getting it easily. Get away from her, John, David finally roared, shedding his meek accountant persona entirely. He lunged forward, tackling John in a surprisingly clumsy burst of desperate energy. The two men went down in a tangled heap on the damp lawn, their struggle muffled by the overgrown bushes and the sudden, intense focus on physical violence. This was my opening. I wrenched open my car door, scrambled into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut, fumbling wildly for the keys in my pocket. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands slick with sweat. David's head snapped up as the engine roared to life. He scrambled off John, desperation replacing anger on his face. Sarah, wait, don't leave. I can explain everything. John, however, seemed unconcerned with the car or David. He was staring intently at the crumpled paper now jammed half under my tire. He lunged toward the car just as I slammed the gear shift into reverse, spinning the wheel hard. The car lurched backward violently, the tires spitting gravel. I felt a heavy thud against the side panel. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I just pressed the accelerator to the floor, tires squealing as I tore away from the bungalow. I drove fast, heart pounding, expecting headlights in my mirror, sirens, anything. But the street remained dark and silent behind me. I was safe for the moment. I had the car. I had the truth about the jewels and the phony marriage. I glanced down at my lap. In the scramble, I had managed to grab one thing, the damp, folded document. I pulled it closer under the dashboard light. I needed to read the full text of the guardianship petition to see exactly how deep this plot went. I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning past the lines about David's suitability as guardian, past the mention of my trust assets, until I reached the final section, the section that explained why Eleanor needed a guardian appointed so urgently. It wasn't because she was frail. It was because the preceding sentence stated that the petition was being filed due to the imminent, involuntary commitment of the ward to a high-security psychiatric facility following a recent incident where the ward had allegedly attempted to murder her own sister, Sarah's actual grandmother, 3 years ago, an incident that had been mysteriously swept under the rug by a very powerful local attorney, an attorney whose name was listed prominently at the bottom of the document as the signatory who filed the initial motion 6 months ago. And that name was David Miller, Esquire. The name leaped off the page, a physical blow that stole the air from my lungs. David Miller, Esquire. Not just an accountant, but a lawyer. A lawyer who had orchestrated a complex legal maneuver involving a relative I never knew existed, a prenuptial agreement I never signed, and the calculated theft of my inheritance, all to secure access to my trust fund, all predicated on a lie about his own mother. But the kicker, the absolute paralyzing realization, was the charge against Eleanor. Attempted murder of my actual grandmother 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Grandma Hayes had a sudden, devastating stroke that the doctors vaguely attributed to stress. She had been frail and confused for the last year of her life, ultimately dying peacefully, or so I was told. Now, this document suggested her stroke was a failed assassination attempt by the woman David claimed was his ailing mother. And David, the seemingly mild-mannered accountant, was the lawyer who had successfully buried the evidence and controlled the narrative around Eleanor's frailty. My foot instinctively slammed the brake, the car skidding slightly on the slick, rain-dampened road. I pulled over onto the shoulder, the humid night air thick with the stench of gasoline and fear. I needed air. I needed to think. David wasn't just a con artist. He was a sophisticated criminal architect who had infiltrated my life using my grief as the blueprint. I unfolded the paper completely, spreading it across the passenger seat. The language was precise, terrifyingly professional. The attorney who filed the initial petition 6 months ago was indeed David Miller. He hadn't just decided to steal. He had been planning this for years, slowly building a legal framework around the fragile existence of Eleanor Davison, knowing that once my grandmother died, the trust would be transferred entirely to me, the sole heir, making me his ultimate target. But if Eleanor tried to kill my grandmother 3 years ago, why was David protecting her now, using my jewelry as collateral? And why did John, the man on the lawn, call Eleanor his aunt and refer to the jewelry as collateral? I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I had to call someone, anyone. Not the police, not yet. Not until I understood the full web of deceit connecting David, Eleanor, John, and my grandmother's sudden death. I scrolled through my contacts, bypassing my best friend, too emotional, and my uncle, too far away. I stopped at my grandmother's former lawyer, the man who handled her will and estate after her stroke, Mr. Sterling. He was old school, meticulous, and fiercely protective of his clients. He was the person I should have called the moment I noticed the first piece of jewelry missing. I dialed the number, my heart hammering a frantic, desperate plea against my ribs. It rang 3 times. 4. On the 5th ring, a raspy, late-night voice answered. "Sterling here. Who is this?" "Mr. Sterling, it's Sarah Hayes. I apologize for calling so late, but I need your help immediately. It's about Grandma Hayes' estate and a man named David Miller." A beat of silence stretched over the line, heavier and more loaded than any silence I'd experienced that night. "Sarah," Mr. Sterling's voice sharpened, instantly professional, "I thought you were handling things quietly. I explicitly advised you not to pursue this yourself." "Pursue what, Mr. Sterling? The missing jewelry? The fact that my boyfriend David is trying to marry me for my trust fund while helping his aunt cover up an attempted murder of my grandmother?" I spat out the words, needing the sound of the truth articulated aloud. Another, longer silence followed. When Mr. Sterling spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper, strained with an unfamiliar fear. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully. David Miller is not Eleanor's nephew. He is the son of the attorney who handled the original commitment hearing for Eleanor Davison 3 years ago, right after your grandmother's accident. David's father was paid handsomely to make sure that whole messy situation went away quietly." "Paid by whom?" I demanded, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. "That's what I don't know, child. I only know that when your grandmother died, David started sniffing around, claiming he was trying to help Eleanor manage her affairs. But Sarah, he was never interested in Eleanor's bills. He was after the other estate, the one your grandmother was protecting." "What other estate? Mr. Sterling, what are you talking about?" "The Hayes Family Trust," he whispered urgently. "It wasn't just for you, Sarah. It was established decades ago to protect something very specific, something your grandmother valued more than life itself. David is not trying to marry you for your money. He's trying to marry you so he can legally declare your grandmother incompetent in perpetuity, thus gaining control of the assets before the final release clause kicks in. But he can't do that unless he gets you to sign the prenuptial agreement first. My eyes flew back to the paper in my lap, the unsigned prenuptial agreement draft. If I signed it, I handed him the keys to everything. Mr. Sterling, I have the document. I'm pulling over now. Can you meet me? I need you to look at this. I need you to tell me who John is and why he was threatening David. No, Sarah, do not meet anyone. David is dangerous, and that man, John, is his hired muscle, the one who handles the dirty work. He's probably connected to whoever paid off the original filing. Listen to me. The only safe place for you is to disappear. Do you hear me? Go home, pack a bag, and get on the first flight out of the state. Don't call anyone, don't talk to David, and for God's sake, don't let anyone know you have that document. As Sterling spoke, my phone vibrated violently against the dashboard. It was a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, looking at the incoming call, then back at the frantic face of Mr. Sterling on the screen. Sarah, are you there? Whatever you do, don't answer that, he pleaded. But the fear of the unknown caller was stronger than the fear of David's lawyer. I swiped the screen, answering on speakerphone, pulling the car back into drive, ready to flee whatever trap I had stumbled into. Hello, I managed, my voice cracking. The line was silent for a terrifying second. Then a cold, synthesized voice, a voice modulator distorting every syllable beyond recognition, spoke. You should have stayed home, Sarah. We just found your car's GPS signal. You have something that belongs to the family. Pull over now, or we will bring the estate down around you, and we will make sure David takes the fall for all the missing pieces. The synthesized voice on the phone was the final, chilling punctuation mark on the nightmare. The realization that more people were involved, people powerful enough to frame David, people who had been tracking my movements via GPS, sent a jolt of adrenaline so intense it cleared the fog of terror. Mr. Sterling's plea to run suddenly seemed insufficient. If they could track my car, they could track me anywhere I went next. Who is this? I demanded into the phone, my own voice sounding strangely steady, fueled now by white-hot clarity. I glanced down at the custody petition again. David wasn't the mastermind. He was a desperate cog in a much larger, more dangerous machine that spanned back to my grandmother's final, mysterious year. The modulated voice laughed, a grating, mechanical sound. We are the custodians of the Hayes legacy, Sarah. The jewels were insurance. Your trust fund is the prize. And David was a necessary distraction. He was meant to marry you, secure the preliminary contract, and then, when you inevitably grew suspicious, he would take the blame for the missing assets and the fake prenuptial agreement, allowing us to move smoothly to the final resolution, your incapacitation. I slammed my foot onto the accelerator again, heading not toward home, but toward the nearest brightly lit commercial zone, a place where anonymity was impossible and a quiet abduction was unlikely. You're wrong, I said, forcing myself to keep talking, stalling for time. David already took the jewelry. He's fighting with his associate John right now on Eleanor's lawn. They're exposed. The synthesized laughter paused. David is expendable. John is a fool. They never understood the gravity of the asset they were guarding. The jewelry was merely a preliminary payment to Eleanor for keeping quiet about the real secret, the one your grandmother died protecting. That secret is tied to the trust, Sarah, and now you have the key. My eyes darted to the petition still sitting on the passenger seat, the document detailing Eleanor's alleged attempted murder of Grandma Hayes. The key. The key to what? I asked, my voice tight. The key to the safe deposit box your grandmother never told you about, the voice hissed, venom dripping through the modulator. It contains the original codicil to the trust, the one that specifies the assets are liquidated only upon the verified, permanent incapacitation of the last surviving member of the Hayes bloodline. Right now, that's you. If you disappear, we move to force the issue. If you try to use that petition, we expose David's forgery and frame you for destroying evidence. They had thought of everything. They needed me alive, legally competent but ultimately controllable or permanently removed. I made a split-second decision. I couldn't outrun them, and I couldn't trust the police yet without irrefutable proof. I needed the safe deposit box. "Fine," I said, turning the car sharply off the main road toward the downtown core. "Tell me where the box is. I'll go there. But you let Mr. Sterling go, and you release David and John. I get access, you get whatever you came for, and we all walk away from each other." The voice hesitated for a long, tense moment. A foolish bargain, but acceptable, under duress. "The bank is First Metropolitan downtown, box 714. You have 30 minutes before we initiate the next phase of the plan regarding the guardianship." I hung up, my hands shaking so violently I could barely steer. I didn't trust them for a second, but I had no choice. I sped toward downtown, calculating the route, all while stuffing the custody petition inside my bra for safekeeping. When I pulled up to the monolithic First Metropolitan Bank Tower, the early morning light was just beginning to tinge the sky gray. I bypassed the main lobby, heading instead for the private entrance Mr. Sterling had once mentioned, a back door used only by private clients. I prayed Sterling was telling the truth about the codicil. I found the safe deposit area, a sterile, hushed vault, and used the code Mr. Sterling had frantically texted me moments after hanging up. Grandma's birthday plus 01. The heavy steel door swung open. Box 714 was smaller than I expected. Inside there was no jewelry, no gold bars, just a single thick manila envelope secured with red wax, bearing my grandmother's faded seal. I broke the seal, my breath catching as I pulled out the contents. It wasn't a codicil. It was a meticulously documented file, not about the trust, but about Eleanor Davison. The file contained evidence proving Eleanor had been successfully committed to the state home for the mentally infirm, the facility David's father had supposedly been trying to keep her out of, for the past 2 years. The final entry, dated 6 months ago, stated she had been moved to an unlicensed private residential care facility under the supervision of a trusted associate, which the report flagged as a major breach of protocol. The truth hit me with sickening clarity. David and John weren't protecting Eleanor. They were hiding her. She wasn't their aging relative to be cared for. She was their captive, the living key to manipulating the trust, and they had been using her as leverage against David's father and whoever truly controlled the Hayes legacy. As I stared at the documents, the heavy vault door behind me began to groan open, not smoothly, but with a loud, grating sound of forced entry. "Put the file down, Sarah." It was David's voice, but harder, stripped of all pretense. He stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed, flanked by John, who now held something long and dark in his hand. Not a gun, but a heavy, antique fire poker, the kind that would fit perfectly into a decorative grate. "You've made this so much harder than it needed to be," David said, stepping into the vault, his lawyer's composure perfectly restored. "I was going to give you a clean break. Now I have to bring you in." I clutched the file to my chest, stepping backward until my spine hit the cold metal of the far wall. "You were never going to let me go, David. You killed my grandmother with that stroke, and you're trying to cover for Eleanor so her keeper, whoever it is, can control the trust." David smiled, a cold, empty expression. "My father handled the stroke, Sarah. Eleanor just provided the motive. And the poker, Sarah? It's an heirloom. John likes using things with sentimental value. It makes the threat feel more personal." Before either of them could move, a sharp, piercing whistle cut through the silence of the vault. It was the sound of a distant, approaching siren, growing rapidly louder. David's eyes widened in alarm. "No. How did Sterling—" "He didn't call the police, David," I whispered, a grim satisfaction settling over me as I realized the true beneficiary of my panicked phone call. "He called the FBI." I reached into my pocket, not for a weapon, but for my cell phone, which I had hastily placed on speaker during my call with Sterling. I had left the line open, routing the call through a specialized encrypted channel Sterling had mentioned in his last hurried text. "If you're in danger, use the burner, Sarah. They can't trace it." The synthesized voice boomed from the phone, echoing off the steel walls of the vault, broadcasting the entire confession, the plot against the trust, the cover-up of Eleanor's crimes, and the framed guardianship, directly to law enforcement closing in outside. "You fool, David! "You recorded this entire confession on the burner?" David roared, lunging toward me with murderous intent. But it was too late. The heavy outer vault door, already forced open, was now entirely pushed aside, revealing not just John and David, but two figures in FBI tactical gear descending into the chamber, flashlights blindingly bright. David froze mid-lunge, the poker now pointed harmlessly at the ceiling, as the agents swarmed the vault, securing the conspirators and the evidence I held tightly in my hand. The nightmare was over, but the weight of what my grandmother had been protecting, and the shocking reality of who my fiancé truly was only just beginning to settle.